you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was quite curious, I suppose, to see the Chief Secretary to the Treasury starting by saying she's so glad that this is the last statement she will ever have to make to the EU. Well, certainly I can't agree, and the SNP can't agree either. It's absolutely surreal to be standing here, days from the original day of departure from the European Union, attempting to fulfil this legal obligation as though things were business as usual. This past few days, Madam Deputy Speaker, proves beyond any doubt that this could not be any further from business as usual in this House. We are absolutely through the looking glass. Events are developing every day around what kind of country we're going to be left with, and there are grave concerns about the future from every aspect of civic society. So I certainly do not share her optimism that there is a bright future ahead. And she talked as well about young people. And young people, Madam Deputy Speaker, are the most pro-EU group of people in this country, and it is their future that this government wants to take away. So shame on her for not recognising the limitations that young people will face when they want to set up those businesses, when they want to trade with the EU, and when they want to travel and advance their education and their opportunities in life. I don't wish, by way of proposing the amendment today, Madam Deputy Speaker, to diminish the work that the OBR does, and my colleagues on these benches and I will always welcome efforts to make the public accounts more transparent and more independent. Absolutely. And the OBR have conducted their analysis rightfully and properly within their remit. But unfortunately, this is precisely the reason that the SNP cannot support this statement's approval tonight, because the OBR can only make forecasts on the basis of stated government policy, regardless of whether this policy is likely to be achieved, or, as the Honourable Member for North Dorset said, whether it's his party against the government, or whether, in fact, the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset is now the Prime Minister, because really, Madam Deputy Speaker, who knows? It's a Dorset thing. Dorset is leading a rebellion against their own government. That's very interesting, and see how happy he is to be doing so. It is an absolute shambles, Madam Deputy Speaker. A member who ought to be supporting the government ends up leading the charge against them. It's not uncommon these days at all. It's part of the whole madness that this government is in. The latest OBR's Fiscal Sustainability Report was published on the 17th of July 2018, and it doesn't reflect the reality of the Prime Minister's proposed deal, which was subsequently published much later on the 25th of November 2018. In the OBR's own outline of the assumptions made in their economic and fiscal outlook, they are clear that the unclear terms of the UK's departure from the EU, and that there is no meaningful basis in which to predict the nature of the relationship between the UK and the EU. And that is the situation we remain in today. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've checked and I've got £3.52 in my purse, and I'd be as well throwing it down the stank as putting it on any outcome of the UK leaving the EU. So it would be an understatement to say that I would find it risky to endorse a fiscal spending plan based on one assumption of our future relationship with Europe. And it's absolutely ludicrous for MPs to be asked to approve this without having any sight of any analysis of the Prime Minister's deal. It's our job in this place as MPs to scrutinise the UK government, but we are really not being given the opportunity to effectively do so. The Prime Minister has said that such an analysis of our deal does exist. She confirmed this in a letter to my colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Ross Skye and Lochaber. So why will the Prime Minister not share the details of that analysis with the House? Is it because she knows, as we all know, that the economists are right and it will be bad for GDP, bad for public finances and bad for the living standards of all of our constituents? GDP growth has gone from being the highest in the G7 before the EU referendum to the lowest today. Imports have been slower than other G7 countries, despite an unprecedented drop in the value of sterling. And it's interesting that exchange rates. It's interesting that at Glasgow Airport, when I come down to London every week, for some time now they have taken the exchange rate off the cash machines in the airport because nobody would take any money out if they saw how dreadful it was. Inward and outward foreign direct investment has dropped, with some analysis suggesting that the drop in inward FDI being as much as 19% compared to a no-Brexit scenario. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're starting to see job losses on a regular basis across these islands. It is no coincidence that these are happening. The Brexit Job Loss Index says that over 200,000 jobs have been lost already, without the UK having left yet. And under a no-deal scenario, Scotland can expect to lose 100,000 jobs, according to the research by the Fraser of Allender Institute, based in my constituency. And speaking of my constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, I had a call on Friday afternoon from a significant business in my constituency who say that they are going down to a 4-day week from a 5-day week, they have laid off temporary staff, and that they are losing orders because of the uncertainty of this government. It is unacceptable, Madam Deputy Speaker, that businesses the length and breadth of these islands are being put into this position by an internal dispute within the Tory party. Madam Deputy Speaker, the OBR hasn't explicitly modelled the effects of a no deal on the economy, but the LSE suggests that if the UK Government were to stick to their frankly unreasonable targets for reducing net migration, it's not unreasonable to expect long-term decline in output and productivity. And the UK Government's deal for Brexit, their shambolic deal, would actually be hugely damaging as well, because EU nationals contribute hugely to our society and to our economy. And the government's aim to reduce EU nationals by 80% will have a massive impact on the UK's economy, on population growth and in our ability to survive as a country, quite frankly, because the UK government say on the one hand that they don't want poor people to have children by bringing in things like the 2-child limit, and they don't want people to come into the country to come and live and build their lives here. But at the same time, we have an ageing population, Madam Deputy Speaker. Where they think we're going to get the people from, I have absolutely no idea, and neither do they. And on top of all of this, income equality has risen since the Brexit vote. It has risen to the extent that on 2 occasions now the OBR could not have predicted the levels of tax that the Treasury was going to receive from the 1% in society. The tax windfall the Chancellor is celebrating isn't a sign of the economy performing well, it's a sign of deep-seated inequality, which is worsening under the UK Tory government. Absolutely.
I'm sure the honourable lady is aware, but would she agree with me that, according to the IFS, on her point, an extra £5 billion will be required to maintain services in line with population growth and appropriate people to support those services?
The honourable member makes an excellent point, and he's absolutely correct, because without people, the economy will falter. It's an economic reality. And the Resolution Foundation have said that the income tax take is up 8% so far this year, but that's coming from the very highest earners, because the wages at the bottom continue to stagnate. And if the OBR openly cannot predict the short-term economic performance, it's unreasonable to ask the House to sign off their own guidance. And it's more difficult now for families to survive on the money that they have, because since the vote, the cost of bread is up 11%, the cost of butter is up 23%, and the cost of milk is up 11%, and we have not left yet. And if people can't afford to put bread and butter on the table, Madam Deputy Speaker, this economy is heading for the drain. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a well-established fact that Scotland didn't vote for or particularly want to leave the EU. Before I stood up, 13,920 of my constituents have signed the petition to revoke Article 50. The Prime Minister has consistently ignored attempts from the Scottish Parliament to find any kind of compromise solution, such as staying in the customs union and the single market, which would limit the damage of this hard Tory Brexit. And if the Prime Minister wants to drag out Scotland against its will, she should have the bottle to come to this House and present the analysis that she says exists. She should have the courage to tell people that it will cost them jobs and it will cost businesses, and she cannot make guarantees about the future. And if the Prime Minister doesn't believe that her Brexit deal can stand up to scrutiny in this House, then this UK Government needs to face up to the reality and ditch Brexit altogether and revoke Article 50. They are throwing good money after bad on no-deal planning, on fridges, on staged traffic jams and botched ferry contracts, when they could be spending that money on lifting the awful austerity cuts we have seen over the past 9 years. The Chief Secretary of the Treasury talked about going around the country and listening to people's public spending priorities. I bet none of them said £33 million for Eurotunnel due to the shambles of the Secretary of State for Transport. I bet none of them said £1 billion to bribe the DUP to attempt to keep this government in power. Day after day in my constituency, I see the impact of this government's callous approach to cost-cutting. The benefit freeze, which is expected to cost families £800 a year, on top of the £900 per year the Bank of England say Brexit is already costing every family. The 2-child policy, which leaves families nearly £3,000 a year worse off if they had a third child. Making a woman with 3 children on a 16-hour contract work the equivalent of 45 hours to make up the difference. And thousands of pounds a year lost by the waspy women who are no longer entitled to their side of the pension bargain, having been cruelly stolen away by previous governments and this one as well. So I ask, how can any government minister look all of the population in the eye and say there's no money for you when the government is asking us to sign a blank cheque for a hard Brexit. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been a lifelong campaigner for independence for Scotland, and scarcely have I seen a clearer case from it, from the shambles of the opposite benches and the incompetence of the Labour Party in opposing them. The UK Government's incompetence is changing hearts and minds all over Scotland on the merits of independence, and I very much hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be an opportunity soon for the people of Scotland to take these matters into their own hands.
Just before the honourable lady concludes, would she care to formally move her amendment?
Gladly and formally move the amendment in my name and that of my honourable colleagues.
Thank you. The original question was as on the order paper. Since when the amendment has been proposed as on the order paper? The question is that the amendment be made. Sir Edward Lee.
Well, I want to